Welcome to Clean Waterways. I am your host, Dave Prescott. In our last episode, we looked at the major impacts that flooding can have on water quality, especially in Long Island Sound. In case you missed that episode, here are a few highlights.
So the water coming down from the atmosphere in terms of the amount of water and how quickly it falls, that's one big piece of the puzzle. But the other big piece of the puzzle are the conditions on Earth, and that can include the topography. Are there mountains or valleys? What's the soil like in that location? It can also mean, are there natural systems? Is there wetlands, like the marsh adjacent to us? Are there forests? But also the built environment. So is the rain falling where there's a lot of parking lots and buildings? Because all of those systems influence how water is going to move once it hits the Earth's surface. In a lot of locations, a lot of development, humans had to build stormwater management systems. And those systems helped to funnel and move water to keep it away from assets like buildings. Unfortunately, as these storms that we experience get larger and more intense, the systems that were built maybe decades ago aren't necessarily large enough to handle that amount of water, and they can become overwhelmed.
You could tell if you have a stormwater problem, if you have too many nutrients in your bay, which is causing oxygen problems, or if you're getting hot water coming in or algae blooms, those types of things. So they can indicate poor stormwater runoff, and that's how it's manifesting itself out in the water. When you have storms, you get things like chemical spills, like in Katrina. It's a point source, but it's really a non-point source because it's all over the place. And that becomes a real risk for first responders if they don't know what kind of pollution they're getting into. And there's going to obviously be bacteria from all the flooded sewage treatment plants and wastewater, the septic systems. So you have to be really careful when you respond and wear protective clothing. So the way to cap it is to prevent the stuff from getting in the first place.
So as you can see, flooding can have a major impact on our local water quality. What goes in the ground goes in the sound. Today, however, we're going to focus more on solutions and how we can improve our local water quality. Today, I'm here with Nicole Davis from Save the Sound, the Watershed's program manager. Welcome, Nicole.
Thanks, Dave.
So I know you've been with us before. Can you tell us a little bit more about your role at Save the Sound?
Yeah, I have a pretty unique role at Save the Sound. I get to work both on the planning end, thinking about solutions and why we have water quality problems and why we have flood problems, and what we can do to fix that. But then I also have the opportunity to work with partners to actually put those solutions in the ground. So I work in our watershed planning programs, but then I also run our green infrastructure and nature-based solutions program.
Excellent. So when most people think about flooding, they think a lot about coastal areas. But flooding obviously doesn't just happen in our coastal zone, it actually can happen in inland waters as well. Can you tell us a little bit about the differences?
Yeah. So what we know about water is that it's dynamic, right? It's not just a straightforward water comes in the ground and it goes out to the sound. There's a lot of forces working together. And so with coastal flooding, you see a lot of impacts from tides like we saw over the past few weeks, where you've got higher tides because of the full moon, but that can also be affected by things like the direction of the wind or how high the waves are pushing water on shore. And so the more water you have coming on shore, the higher the water comes. And it's really important to note with both coastal and inland flooding that it's a natural phenomenon. Low-lying areas in our shore and along our rivers were designed to flood to help take up that excess water. And so what we see inland, especially when we get a lot of rain, is that you've got water coming downstream, but our water system is designed to move water so fast into our rivers that the water comes up fast, faster than our rivers can handle it. And that's when rivers overtop their banks and we see inland flooding. The other thing that we see a lot, especially in developed areas, is where low-lying areas tend to accumulate water when it rains or after it rains. And that has a lot to do with impervious surfaces, the hardscaped roofs and driveways and roads that we have, kind of channeling water to those low spots that then have nowhere to go. The other thing, too, that's important about flooding to think about is flash flooding. And I'm only mentioning it because we saw an event in the state where we got a lot of rain, an unprecedented amount of rain in a really short period of time, which was more than our rivers could handle. And so water came up really fast and caused a lot of damage.
You mentioned king tides. Yes, we actually just got through some really intense king tides here in Groton. In fact, the tides were running about a foot and a half higher, and with the coastal storm offshore, it was pretty big. From a standpoint of natural systems like wetlands, how can they help with flooding and water quality?
Yeah, wetlands are one of the most important natural features on a coast. If you think of them like a sponge, right? It starts out as kind of a dry bank that has plants in it, but the more water that comes into it, the more it swells and the more water it can hold. And so those are really important to absorbing things like king tides. And if you think about the weather we've had, like a dry sponges don't absorb as much as a wet sponge does. So when we're devoid of that water, it takes longer for that sponge to react. So the fewer wetlands we have, the harder they have to work to keep up with things like king tides.
Interesting. So what are some of the tools that communities can actually use to help alleviate some of this flooding that's going on?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's actually one of my favorites. Something I spend a lot of time thinking about. Right, we live in Connecticut, which has been developed for hundreds of years, and so those are things that we're not going to undo. But the idea is really thinking about how we manage stormwater differently to help alleviate some of those flooding issues that we're seeing. You know, our old systems were designed to move water out of our roadways and out of our lawns as fast as it possibly could into the rivers. But what that actually does is put more stress on our natural system. So what we try to do is recommend thinking about putting water into the ground, kind of mimicking what would happen naturally. So there's a couple ways we can think about that. The easiest is green stormwater infrastructure or green infrastructure. You also can hear about it as bioretention or rain gardens or bioswales, and it really all does the same things. It's these designs that put water in the ground. So water goes into the ground where root systems can soak up some of that water, but it also hits the water table and goes into the rivers at a slower speed than what would happen if it was just running off through a pipe. So
it seems like there are a lot of opportunities out there. Who is ultimately responsible for making these changes and implementing this green infrastructure?
It can be done at a lot of different scales. In Connecticut, stormwater regulations happen at a local level. So it's working with your municipalities to kind of think about how much stormwater is being managed and how areas near wetlands and rivers are being reviewed. But there's things that homeowners can do, not just private or public property owners or legislation. We work a lot with homeowners to do residential rain gardens, which are really just small rain gardens at the end of somebody's downspout. And what those are, if you think about it like a regular pollinator garden with native plants in it, instead of being domed above the earth, it's just a slight depression, like building a little tiny bathtub. And it's not designed to be wet, it's designed to just capture that water and soak it into the ground. Something we haven't talked about with stormwater, right? We talked a little bit about flooding and the volume of stormwater, but stormwater also carries everything that it touches with it. So when people put fertilizers and pesticides in their yards, or even bits coming off of their driveway, like brake tires or any fluids leaking from their cars, it's polluted water that's getting into our waterways. So letting it hit the grass in a garden somewhere it can soak in naturally helps to filter out, so the water that's making it to our rivers is cleaner.
So it really shows that we all have to be paying attention, not communities, in order to help our local water quality there. It seems like your group is actually doing a lot with not only municipalities but also other groups as well. And is this something that, you know, as you mentioned, the opportunities for homeowners to implement this in their own yards? I think at this point we'll take a little quick break, and then when we come back we'll talk a little bit with Nicole again about water quality and flooding.
How can we get rid of this old motor oil? There has to be a better choice. choosing to keep water clean is the right choice.
If floodwater affected your home, there are a few steps you can take to start your recovery process. Stay away from floodwater. It may contain hazards like sewage, downed power lines, or sharp objects. Wear protective gear if you're cleaning mold or flood debris. Check with the local health department to ensure the water from your faucet is safe to drink. Take photos and videos of the damage and keep receipts of all repairs. If you have flood insurance, file a claim as soon as possible. For more tips, visit ready.gov/floods.
Welcome back. I'm here with Nicole Davis, Save the Sound's Watershed's project manager, and we're talking about the relationship between flooding and water quality. So talk a little bit more about development. What are the impacts that new development can have on flooding and our local water quality?
Yeah, the first one I talked about a little bit earlier. It's impervious surfaces, thinking about replacing, soft landscapes with pavement like roofs and driveways and sidewalks. So when developing, it's really important to think strategically, leaving trees as much as you can and native vegetation in place, but also minimizing the footprint of a development. Keeping a set-aside open space can also go a long way, especially if it's strategically placed where you can manage stormwater within that place. But then it's also thinking about where the stormwater goes once a site has been developed. And we've talked about rain gardens a little bit. And that idea of retaining that first inch of water on site or inch and a half is really important for water quality, both because water washes away everything that it touches, but also by letting the plants do what they're supposed to do and kind of absorb that water, so less is making it into our waterways, can be really important too.
Excellent. There are a lot of development. Are there opportunities at the municipal level to get involved with helping to protect our local water quality and dealing with flooding?
Yeah, municipal partners are one of my favorite to work with. I think they provide a unique opportunity both because they have places that the community already goes to, like parks and schools. And so any place that they can put in a green infrastructure project that's visible to the community can go a long way. Any sort of educational value. And working within a school system can be fantastic too, providing opportunities for kids to learn about stormwater and why it's important and think about it different than putting it in a pipe, but where it should actually go. So being able to teach them about that and have them talk to their friends and their neighbors and their families, but then to actually participate in putting a project in the ground, right? I find any time people can get their hands dirty, that lesson stays with them longer.
Absolutely. Do you have any good examples of projects that you're particularly proud of?
Yeah, we had one that we completed last fall, working with the town of Hamden, and it's a large project, larger than a lot of municipalities can handle. They just happen to have the space in one of their town parks. But we constructed a 40,000 square foot rain garden with the public works staff. So it was designed in-house, working with Save the Sound by the town engineer. And then we worked with the public works crew who does most of their road work and hardscape work and taught them how to install green infrastructure. So it's hopefully projects they can move forward with in the past. And so far it's been functioning. It's filled a lot this year. And just to give you perspective, 40,000 square feet when it's filled with stormwater is about the equivalent of Olympic-sized swimming pool. So we generate a lot of stormwater. And so that's all water that was contributing to localized flooding. And will actually translate into smaller projects that the public works crew can do.
Wow, that's a huge project. Are there opportunities? I know we talked a little bit about rain gardens, but what about homeowners? I know you mentioned there's opportunities for them to potentially implement rain gardens. How effective would they be at that local level, at that yard level?
It may not seem like much when you're just thinking about one small garden, but everything we do has cumulative impacts, right? So the more that people do, the farther it goes. So having a lot of rain gardens in one neighborhood or one town can have a lot of benefits. And we haven't talked at all about the co-benefits of any of these projects, right? We've talked about stormwater and filtering pollutants. But there's a lot of movement around pollinator pathways. And what's really important to think about when you're thinking about a rain garden is that we're using native vegetation in these. So it's creating kind of mini ecosystems within suburban developments and urban landscapes that might not have the same kind of green space. So putting that native vegetation in creates home for birds and pollinators like bees and butterflies and hummingbirds. Things that we want to attract to our area because, right, it's the small things in an ecosystem that really affect the bigger things like people.
Absolutely. And native vegetation is really so important to kind of mimic what's happening in their community, in their yards and whatnot. Are nurseries and other places being more receptive to offering more opportunities for more native plantings to help with this, these types of projects, to help with, with stormwater, water quality, flooding, all that?
Yeah, there's a lot of nurseries that are starting to be receptive and kind of recognizing not just the need for the market, but like anything, it's consumer demand that really drives this. So the more people are asking for native plants, the more that you're going to see them and the more available they're going to become. But it sounds like you know a lot about native plants.
A little bit.
Do you have a favorite?
Yes, I'm a big fan of Seaside Goldenrod, and I was working in the past on a program with similar to what you're talking about, working with kids on planting a rain garden. This was actually at a local environmental organization's property, and we literally put the Seaside Goldenrod in the ground, and within 30 seconds, a monarch butterfly landed right on top of it. So I think there's some really cool, opportunities to use natives, and I think there's a big piece about that natives are beautiful, and the more we can implement them, the better. What are some other ways that homeowners can help out in terms of dealing with, helping the local water quality, dealing with flooding on their own properties? It sounds like rain gardens are a good solution. Are there other opportunities?
Yeah, honestly, vegetation in general. We're sitting on the coast right now and we have a clear view to the water, but little bits of landscape, shrubs and short vegetation and native grasses are really designed to help soak up more water than a lot of the cultivars or the commercially available species that weren't native to Connecticut originally. And so working with groups to help promote that, but also working within your landscape and talking to your neighbors can go a long way. Another group that does a lot of work in this part of the state is the Eastern Connecticut Conservation District, who's done some stormwater projects, working with municipalities, working with homeowners, and they also hold a native plant sale every year.
Oh, excellent. And where do they hold that?
Out of curiosity.
That's a good question. It's out of there. It's an order. So they send out an order form in April, and then they have pickups at like 2 or 3 locations across the state.
So there are a lot of ways that homeowners can get more involved in this, especially it sounds like they can really look at their own property and look at opportunities for them to help get more of that water into the ground, which is really beneficial. Are there things that kids can do as well?
Yeah, I feel like kids are really where momentum happens. So getting kids excited about these types of projects, you can do rain gardens at schools, and working with teachers is a great way to start. But kids themselves, right, sometimes I feel like they don't always feel like they're having an impact, but it's amazing what they say, what people take away from. So making sure that they're talking to their friends and their neighbors and their parents about what they're learning. And it's really important to note that every October is Coastal Cleanup Month. So participating in things like that really have big impacts. Getting garbage out of the storm drains and out of our waterways has a big impact on fish and wildlife, and even shorebirds. And it doesn't even have to happen during a coastal cleanup day. They can pick up trash in their schoolyard or when they're taking a walk. And pet waste is another big problem that we see polluting our waterways. So remembering that pet waste needs to be picked up, but also that you need to dispose of it in the garbage can, that storm drains aren't a place to put your pet waste or your leaf debris, or even your junk mail, which we unfortunately have seen. It all makes its way back into the water.
So it seems like kids are a lot of part of the solution as well. Do you find that they have a big impact on their family and their friends as well?
They do, because I think most parents and grandparents and friends are excited to hear what their kids are talking about and what the kids in their lives are passionate about. And they are the future, so making sure that it's stuff that they see value in and that feel valuable themselves is really important, which is why we like working with youth organizations, not just with adults, but giving everybody those opportunities to learn about why stormwater is important.
As we get close to wrapping up, anything else you want to mention about stormwater or water quality, or why it's important and why we should care?
Yeah, honestly, water is one of the most important things on the planet, right? No matter where you stand, you're in a watershed. we have all the water on the planet that we are ever going to have. So it's really important to make sure that we're taking care of it. And what we do has impact. So making sure that you're making smart choices about what's happening in your lawn and in your neighborhood and in your community to protect it, not just for us, but for future generations.
Well, excellent. Nicole, thank you so much for joining us today to talk about flooding and water quality impacts and whatnot. For more information on any of these topics, water quality, flooding, stormwater, please check us out on our YouTube channel, or you can check out savethesound.org. I'm Dave Prescott. Thanks for joining us today.
Save the Sound, a proud partner of this program, leads environmental action in your region by fighting climate change, saving endangered lands, protecting the Sound and its rivers, and working with nature to restore ecosystems.